Hi, and welcome to our Coaching Corners call. This is a call covering strength and conditioning for cyclists. We are conducting a live Q&A. My name is Mark Edwards. I am the people manager at Baker Cymru. I will be the host for the meeting this evening. My colleague Chris Lewis is also on the call. He is essentially the expert. I'm going to pass over to Chris now. He's going to do a bit of an introduction of who he is and what he does at Biker Cymru and Sport Wales, and we'll open the floor to the guys in the room then for any questions. Over to you, Chris.
Cool. It's actually wicked to see so many people on the call. So I'm a S&C coach, so strength and conditioning coach. I've worked at Sport Wales since about 2015, and then I've worked with cyclists in terms of a strength and conditioning capacity since about like 2016, 2017. And that's mainly with, I guess, riders on the pathway at the moment is, but also like sort of previously, a lot of that work has been around athletes going to Commonwealth Games, and that's sort of like ramping up again. So it's sort of Biker Cymru pathway athletes, right from sort of like youth and junior through to Commonwealth Games athletes if they're based in Wales. And so that's what I do in terms of like an S&C. That's my background. But I'm also doing a track sprint coaching role at the moment, because there's quite a lot of crossover between strength and conditioning and track sprinting. I'm doing that as a sort of maternity cover position. So like I see things through both sort of a strength and conditioning lens and then also like a coach's lens from doing a little bit of coaching more recently. Anything else I've missed there, Mark?
Yeah, that's great.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So I guess my background before that is I did an undergraduate in sports science at Bath University, and then I did a master's in strength and conditioning at Cardiff Met. And the reason I ended up working for Sport Wales is because during that master's I did a placement at Sport Wales, and then after that gained some part-time employment, and then eventually moving to full-time employment.
Great. Yeah. For the most part, then you've been kind of involved in strength and conditioning employed for over 10 years, but about 10 years. Somebody's been giving you money for it. That you must be doing a good job. And then before that, obviously your studies have taken you kind of through. So you've got an extensive kind of palmarès of strength and conditioning experience. Okay. I don't know whether you had anything you wanted to like, cover first off, Chris. So some basics around like strength and conditioning for cyclists. Then or do you want to go straight into questions? Do you have anything?
I've got things that I want to cover off, but if there are topics I want to kind of cover off, but I could potentially, and I've got notes of them, but if they're not covered off in the Q&A, I could maybe come to them at the end, perhaps.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this go to, well, we'll see now if anyone wants to ask a question. Uh, anyone want to ask a question? Anyone got a burning? Obviously, we did have a kind of topics covered kind of thing in the description. Any hands up? I don't know. I see that. Any hands up? Oh, we got
Yeah,
Jonathan. Jonathan's physically got his hand up.
yeah,
Jonathan,
because I can't find the hand button. I don't
no,
know where it is.
I don't know what it is either, mate.
I
There we
find the
are.
team. I don't know where it is here.
Over
Uh,
to you then, Jonathan, for the first question. Do you just want to say who you are and where you're from? I know we
yeah,
were on the
I'm
call.
Jonathan Booth. I'm from Towie Riders. I coach there. I coach track and road and cyclocross and a bit of everything, really. I think my question is around the current fashion for Zone 2 training. Is that how much should youth riders be doing as a sort of proportion of everything else they do? What's your thoughts on Zone 2? Those sorts of questions, really. It's the in thing at the moment. I'm just wondering what your views are on it and how much of a role it should play in training youth riders.
Oh, that's a good question. I think I might be stepping out a little bit outside in terms of like the S&C side of things, but I'll give it a good shot. I think what's going to be prescribing zone 2 at that elite level. That's going to be all through a lens of making that moving that rider on physiologically, which I understand that principle, but you may question whether that is that the best use of time with a younger rider, particularly if they need like a successful session for a younger rider isn't just going to be like a straight physiological adaptation. There's probably going to be like technical and tactical development within that session. So I would say like, whilst there's probably a place for there's probably a place for the rider like understanding like what an easy ride is and making sure there's like balance to their training around like not every time is like a bit of a smash fest when they get on the bike, so they're not doing too much intensity around that side of things. But I wouldn't be like, oh my, I think you're probably going to be missing quite a lot of like technical and tactical development with a younger rider if you're going to go out and follow some kind of 80-20 rule around what. And I'm only taking that sort of 80-20 based off published literature and like what seems to be touted at that kind of elite level. So I think you've got to be really cautious about like applying what an elite cyclist is doing to change their physiology versus what a youth rider has to do. When one, it's got to be like quite fun and engaging, and every session hopefully has some element of like sort of technical tactical development in it, and that would take priority for me over no, you've got to ride strict zone 2 for this 2-hour session. Does that...
It does. I mean, I guess it's sessions themselves, I suppose, are, you are going to cover sort of technical and tactical. You're going to give them intervals to do and all those sorts of things. I guess it's things like doing Sunday rides and all those sorts of things, and the add-on things you do outside the club. And are they helpful at youth age to be doing, or is there better things they could spend their Sunday mornings doing in terms of cycling? Sorry, it's a horrible question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think such a cop-out answer, but like I guess I think there's real value in like if I would be hesitant to be like, oh no, you've got to stick in zone 2. I could understand it in terms of like in the week, like you've got like an hour or hour and a half to do easy, just to make sure that and trying to keep that a lowish intensity in zone 2, just to make sure that they recover and they understand the principle of like really simple things of like selecting a route that doesn't include too much climbing, or like understanding this kind of stuff. And like but I wouldn't, in the weekend, I'd be like, I don't know, like you'll probably I can't speak too much through an endurance coach lens, but like probably going to learn a lot from like riding with people faster than them. What is that? Do they learn how to fuel a ride better because they're riding with people that are faster than them? Suddenly everyone's eating more. Suddenly like they're learning loads more by like communicating on the road to each other. All sorts of like how to like hold a wheel. All this kind of stuff would be like potentially way more important than like, oh my God, I can't do this 4-hour group ride with people faster than me because I need to stick in zone 2. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I don't think like as well, like I think I can't be in your shoes, but like I wouldn't overthink it too much. Like as long as there's a bit of balance that like there's some easy sessions in the week to allow them down days to recover, and then there are really hard sessions to push them on both technically and tactically and physiologically, then it'd be probably fine. I wouldn't be worried about sticking to like an 80-20 or like, oh, you need to do 2/3 of your work in zone 2 and you're not going to develop if you're doing too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Cool.
Thank you.
We've had some hands up and questions. So I think Mike Richards, you put your hand up. Did you
thanks.
Want to add anything?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chris. My question is similar to the one that's in the chat bar, really. I should say from Mainly Flyers. Last year, we put our academy, so we put 15 riders, Youth A, Youth B, under 14, under 16, through an S&C program in Cardiff, met with the Youth Physical Development Centre. I thought it was a really good program. The feedback that we had from some parents was that it wasn't challenging their children the way they thought that it should in terms of loading them with weights. And when I met with the course director, they were very clear in terms of their philosophy of kids need to move properly first before we start loading them with weights. So it's just a question around that, really. How important is it that young 14, 16-year-olds learn to move properly first before loading them with weights?
So yeah, just before you answer that, Chris. So the question is kind of in line with that. So Rhiannon's asked in the chat box, what kind of strength and conditioning should youth riders be doing? Talking of under 16s and younger. So yeah, kind of the same question there. Over to you, Chris.
I'll answer. I'll try and answer Mike's question first. I think that is really, really important to like you say, move well before loading, like applying too much external load. But also it's probably worth considering that there may be load going through their bodies through certain tissues, even if there is like no external load on them. Does that make sense? So like if they might be doing some like hops and some bounds or something impactful that's like putting a lot of load through like lower limb, like like trying to achieve bone density or like things like that. Or if they're doing like certain body weight exercises, if they were like doing press ups or something like that, then, or like single leg squats or hamstring bridges, there's still load going through their body.
And it was a lot of that. It was, throwing a tennis ball at each other on one leg and that sort of thing. And I think the feedback was that the kids wanted more. And these kids, some of them were on the pathway, some of them were about to be on the pathway. What is it that you would expect at Big Your Cymru a 14, 16-year-old to be doing in terms of S&C?
I'd certainly say from a 14, 15 and so under 16, so still youth, like it doesn't look very different, like it doesn't look too different depending what the sport is, because the sort of like basics of moving well with good technique and then adding a little bit of load doesn't look too different for a cyclist versus like a footballer, if that makes sense. Because or a cyclist, like a cyclist versus a triathlete, these kind of things, because you ultimately, like, you kind of want to prepare them to progress along cycling, but you also have to be mindful they might not want to do cycling forever, and that they need to, if they want to like transition to like just playing football socially, then they haven't just if you just cycle, then you're not really getting too much loading through like impact loading through lower limb, and that would have big considerations on like bone density and like things around that. So I guess to answer your question, what does 14 to 16 look like? It doesn't look too different. It doesn't look too different from, say, what might be being prescribed if you were in like a netball academy or a football academy or a rugby academy, because it's all the basics of moving well under like with body weight, and then slowly adding load, but could still be body weight stuff like you spoke around, like say like body weight lunges, like single leg hamstring bridges, single leg squats, like press ups, chin ups, those sort of things, and trunk exercises. And if you can nail those kind of things, adding in then some load, but that's the load is probably coming at like that junior age, so like a little bit older than 16, I would say.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mark.
Do you think
it does? It's really helpful, Chris. Thank you very much. I think,
and I guess I've had questions before from usually parents, I guess, and they might be like, because particularly at that lower stage of the pathway, sometimes you don't have a complete handle on what the athlete's doing. So you might say like, oh, here's an example of a S&C session that you can do. And they turn around and say like, oh, how are we going to do that? Because we're already doing S&C that they do with their football side. And I'm kind of like, well, if the football S&C is, if the S&C session is makes sense, if it's a decent person prescribing that'll be completely appropriate for an under 14, under 15 cyclist, because there's nothing there's nothing super specific about S&C at that young age for the sport. It starts to differentiate a little bit more that older side of things.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mark.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for that question. Hello. Okay. So just moving on, we do have another question and a suggestion, Chris. So we got another question, but there's a suggestion in the chat about doing some of your presentation and covering that. Do you want to maybe present some of what you kind of had and wanted to cover, Chris? And then
the concepts that I wanted to cover were, and to be honest, I've only bullet pointed this out. I haven't got slides, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. No worries.
So to answer the let me go to answer age. Yeah, I guess the topics we wanted to talk about around the age appropriate exercise and training. So I think we've I guess spoken a bit around that in terms of covering that question. The only the side of things that I hadn't covered with that answer is probably around like, we've answered that question from a physiological side of things. And I guess what I would want to highlight is, in that example with Mike, like what's important to consider is like, are the athletes or like children or like riders, however you want to refer to them, as like, are they I guess like psychologically ready for some more kind of structured S&C training around, are they is that just going to, are they at an age where that's just going to not engage them? Can it be delivered in a manner that is like sort of fun, challenging, games based a lot of the time with that younger generation, rather than just viewing everything through a physiological like sort of like a physiological lens? Like, you wouldn't want at that sort of and I'm sure that the stuff up at Cardiff Met is really, really good, Mike. I'm sure, and you would have had experience of that. That wouldn't just be with that younger, particularly the younger group. That wouldn't just be, here's your program, let's follow it religiously. This is good technique. There'd be loads of element of like warm-up games, like fun challenge. The athletes having a lot of autonomy over what they're doing. Because that is having and making sure that those athletes are like mature enough to want to partake in that cross training. So therefore they have a really positive experience of it, rather than trying to start too much a very structured, regimented training program too early, and then they have a very negative, potentially have a very negative association with that training, which then is going to have quite large, longer term consequences. If I bring you in again, would you say that was reflective of a lot of the stuff you saw?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. My 9-year-old still goes, and I think it's a wonderful program up there to keep youngsters engaged in S&C. I think the parents in our club needed educating in terms of what the program was about. I think there were some parents that just thought that their under 16, under 14 rider was going to come home doing heavy squats and not being able to walk the next day. And that was some of the feedback that I had. I expected my son or daughter to be really struggling the morning after one of the sessions, and the feedback from the university was, we will not compromise, we will not do that until we can see them be able to move properly and do it in a safe way, and we will load when we think they're ready. And we only managed one term up there, which is really disappointing, because they put a bespoke program on for Mainly Flyers, and I wish I had persevered more with educating the parents, which is why it's so good to have you here this evening.
Great. So, Chris, is there anything else you wanted to cover off? And I can move on.
I suppose around that, for understanding the right strength work at different stages in athletes, I think I've covered that. I think we've spoken about that, but there might be other examples that we can cover in more questions.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, I'm happy to move on to the question. So, Paul, Paul Douglas, Dougie, we call you Paul or Dougie, right?
Yeah, Dougie, yeah. No,
you can ask the question if you're happy.
Well, I think Chris has already answered it for me, and I'm in quite a fortunate position where my daughter's on the talent ID for the sprinting, which is under Chris at the moment.
Oh, right, okay.
But Chris did cover it when he was answering Mike's question. It's the fact that we've got to work on the functional fitness before we start hitting the S&C. And like you say, it's got to be fun and challenging, fun but challenging in the same time. So I'm like I say, my daughter's getting the strength and conditioning stuff from Chris now and doing them sessions as well. So it's working well for her, and she's challenged but not physically tired challenge. And it's good that some of the exercises, equipment's minimum as well, which is a real bonus as well.
Oh, great. That's a really positive feedback. Chris, you're doing a good job. Well done. We'll let the boss know.
We'll see when she gets to the nationals.
But with that, Paul, I guess it's trying to, and it depends what we mean by functional fitness, but if they're able to do, just trying to think if they're able to do different, obviously you don't want to be pulled and do a huge amount of sports and just neglect other areas around social life, around schoolwork and these kind of things. But I guess if I use real life examples, for example, as an athlete on our sprint program, on our pathway, and we try and really encourage them to carry on with their other sports when they can achieve good balance, because that probably yields better sort of outcomes in the longer term. So I think of one athlete he's kept up with, he's done like sort of taekwondo alongside his cycling thus far in the pathway, and he's getting to he will be a junior next year. He'll be a last year of youth this summer, and because he's done, we've encouraged him to keep up with his taekwondo. His like mobility around his hips is fantastic, and his flexibility around his hips is fantastic. So therefore, you don't have to work on that at all in the gym, and also his ability to achieve a really aerodynamic seated position is fantastic, because of his hip mobility. And I guess that's an example whereby, similar to maybe what you're saying around Paul, like it doesn't have to be, oh, this is S&C and this is a really structured thing. Like if they can do like multi-sport for a long time and it not take too much away from their cycling, then that's kind of a great thing. So like, and I think another, you'll know, but I won't say their name, but like an athlete on the Talent ID program, currently playing football. And I think that's fantastic, because one of the issues you might have or you might have to start putting into a structured S&C program if a rider just did cycling, was some kind of impact to develop lower limb bone mineral density, particularly in a female population, whereby there's a real danger that if they don't achieve a high peak bone mineral density, then that will set them up for issues later in life. So like trying to really encourage that person to carry on with the football as long as they want, because that's giving them loads of different physical skills, like around like change of direction, lower limb bone loading, loads of good skills that if they they might not want to be a cyclist in a year's time, and we at least set them up to make successful transitions and stay active in sport in general. I
totally agree. You know, it's good that they are doing what they're doing, and like I said, the flexibility we know with my daughter, you know, that is an area where she needs to work on more as well. So yeah, that's it's good to know. So yeah, thanks very much. Cheers, Mark.
Great, thanks, thank you very much, Paul, for that interaction. So I've got two questions in the chat box from the same Ben Hex. We've got, do Bike Cymru offer strength and conditioning sessions? And the other question is, as a BC coach, British cycling coach, am I allowed to run strength and conditioning within a coaching session? Do you know the answers to those?
Oof.
I don't know necessarily, but I know, well, you'll be able to answer the first one. Did Bike Cymru offer strength and conditioning sessions at the moment?
We don't at the moment. We definitely could put some guidance out there on the website and some links to some suggested British cycling resources. So we can do that as an action after, Mark.
Yeah, 100%. So if you can send me that, I can send them out to the attendees of the session today and share that out and then host that on the website. So far as the second question, then,
as a BC, I think I can't, I guess, give you a definitive answer, and that probably comes down to what we define as S&C sessions. And what you mean by within a coaching session. I think
Ben, obviously feel free to, you know, if you want to interact and elaborate a bit more on, you know, maybe something you might want to plan in a session, what that would be. Ben? You are muted now. Hello? They haven't muted, and whether they're having technical issues.
I'll cut. Well, it's been recorded, so I'll try and cover.
Recorded. Yeah, go on, but I know if Ben had a question to.
I'll try and cover the question because I think it's a really.
Oh, there they are.
Is it working now? Sorry.
Yeah, it is, but yeah, here we go.
Sounds and technical issues. Apologies. Yeah, so we run sessions with anywhere between kids of like quite young age up to 16, and we've always thought that a strength and conditioning session, or maybe away from the normal mountain bike arena, but just in a village hall, would be great, especially in the winter. I think what we've never understood is what would be effective, and I think we'd have a pretty good idea of what we could try and do, but then are we then even insured as coaches or as a club to run such a session? Chances of anything happening pretty low, but it's kind of like, we're quite indoctrinated as coaches about sort of the environment you're allowed to coach in, like on bikes and this, that, and the other, but then kind of doing something different.
Before you start then, Chris, so far as like I've been involved in swimming clubs for years and triathlon clubs as a volunteer coach, pretty much like yourself there, Ben. Is it the mountain bike club mainly you do stuff with?
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, in Llandegla, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So far as swimming clubs are concerned, what they kind of do, they have land training. So they'll do their swimming sessions, and quite often, even at a young age, they will certainly do sessions in the local hall or the sports hall where the swimming pool is, and they'll do literally mobility work and stretches and things of that nature. I believe there's a CPD that they kind of have to do to be able to run them sessions. At the moment, as far as I know, there isn't a British cycling version, if that makes sense. But I'll pass you on to Chris because he is the expert. But certainly in other sports,
you're sounding more informed than I am, Mark. What I would say is, I 100% agree with you that you have to, from a coaching perspective, you have to protect yourself for if anything was bad to happen, or any injuries and that kind of side of things. I think you can be really confident in doing tagging on some, like, I say S&C, but like body weight training, some kind of circuits, whether that's within like an off bike warm up before your bike coaching session, and or some like body weight circuits at the end of the session, without stepping out of your like professional practice space, if that makes sense. I think you would probably, I agree with Mark that if you are doing a standalone session in the town hall, like, I think from your perspective, I think you should. I wouldn't feel comfortable advising you go and do that. I think for my personal opinion is, I think it's a fantastic idea, particularly with mountain bike, particularly in the winter, particularly how like physically demanding mountain bike is, and how you need to train for that, because simply going out and riding your bike isn't going to prepare you optimally for how technically demanding like XC is now, or like if they're another mountain bike discipline, how technically exhausting descending is, for example. But I do think that before you jump in and do that, there probably is some kind of step that you could take regarding like whether that's some kind of qualification that potentially myself and Mark aren't aware of, before you go and like jump into that, even though I think it would be absolutely fine. I just think from a coaching perspective, you're probably leaving yourself a little bit open potentially.
I think a few years ago, I think there was some sort of coaching module, coaching type thing. And I think before Tim Matthews left Welsh Cycling, there was talk of trying to get something arranged, but obviously that's kind of things have moved on, and the whole coaching side of the coaching qualification side has moved on. So if you could advise, like maybe not now, but come back to us with
100%.
online guidance.
There's definitely
your remit is this, and don't go beyond that, but you could get this qualification, as long as it's not a massive burden to get the qualification.
So certainly on the BC website, and I do have meetings with the education team there at British Cycling. There are more and more CPDs that are being kind of produced. They're none around strength and conditioning as far as I'm aware at the moment. But they're like assume if you've got access to the Learners Hub. So there's like training out to coach on rollers, and there's extra things, and working with women and girls, and there's very specific bespoke stuff. I'll check for you, Ben. I'll make a note of your request, and it might be something for all the coaches who are on the call that they 100% probably might be interested in running them kind of separate sessions away from like a warm up or whatever, and introducing that into a whole bigger part of a session. I'll find out for you, Ben. Okay.
Okay.
100%. I'll find out. So I haven't got any more questions in the box. Any other questions? I've got like an off the thing question. So if anyone wants to ask anything, hand up or just unmute yourself, start shouting. Is this something someone want to ask?
Yeah, can I ask, Mark?
Yeah, Rhiannon. Yeah.
Just wondering, you mentioned about women and a part of the women's group that Fion does. And just like, should women do, especially women over a certain age that's entering a rather taboo area that we don't talk about, the big M, should we be looking at doing special, like women designed S&C court like practice, following our own structured plans rather than kind of the generic do the same as men? Because obviously women are completely different to men, and when we're going through all that menopause and the perimenopause and everything, it's all a bit different to keep our bone density, and we lose muscle structure so quickly.
Yeah, brilliant question. So Chris, I don't know whether you've got any experience working with this kind of subject. Do you want to?
I don't, but I'll give it a shot. I think I agree. I completely agree with you that you're going to want to do some kind of definitely do some kind of strength training to try and hold on to muscle mass, because like muscle mass will decrease with age, but you can offset that massively through training. So some kind of strength training, again, highly recommend. But then I would say but that's not that I wouldn't recommend that in a aging male person from a health perspective. I just think it becomes even more important in a female population, and as well, like including some kind of relatively low intensity, like kind of like jump type stuff around to offset losses, age related losses in bone mineral density. But again, that's not to say that I wouldn't you wouldn't encourage that in a male population. It just becomes even more important to do it in a female population, to make the time to do it. So some kind of like repeated jumps, even though it's just like pogo jumps on the spot, or some kind of upper limb like impact type stuff to try and increase or not increase bone, reduce the reductions, offset reductions in bone mineral density associated with that aging process. I don't know if that answers it. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like, so do the same, because a lot of the stuff that I'm finding is all very male focused. It's quite difficult to find things that are are like female focused to work just specifically on females, but what you're saying makes sense because it's like you'd say the same thing to men, but perhaps just do more jumps or do more those kind of things rather than,
I guess is what, like, it probably just becomes more pertinent to follow the advice and action it in a female population because of those, like, the consequences around, like, the fact that there's more chance that in a female population you haven't achieved as high a peak bone mineral density, because you're starting off with less muscle mass than a biological male, so therefore it becomes even more important to produce some kind of strength training to hold on to it as you age. Like, I don't it's hard, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily different advice, it just becomes even more important to follow, if that kind of makes sense.
yeah, mate.
Have you got any examples that you want to, like, that you think that there's advice you've seen that has
there's more and more advice coming out about women doing strength training and lifting heavy weights, like as heavy as you can go, really, not like going straight in and doing crazy, make sure your form's right and all that business first. It is becoming more and more like publicized and known, and there are more books and stuff coming out, but it's just as a general overall, it's gym is a very male dominated area, isn't it? Strength conditioning is very male dominated, and it's just making sure, well, having the information there, isn't it? So women can access it and are confident enough that what they're getting is the right thing for them to help them through quite a difficult time. And it's for younger women as well, and youth girls, to make sure they're getting the right things to set them up for as they get older, so they're already got it ready for when that happens, because it could happen at any age, really, can't it? From 25 upwards you could start seeing symptoms. So it's quite important, I think, that we kind of get more publication about women and strength training and how it affects our bodies during the menopause.
Yeah, the only thing I would say around that is, I guess you could, if you're from not saying this is specific to you, but like it can, a gym environment can be quite male dominated. I'm really conscious, say, what you said there, I see in terms of working with some, like, the young track sprint female athletes. I know, like, to try and pick apart some of what could be potential barriers for them as going training. It's not just a question of, like, here's an example S&C program. You've got good technique, now go and do it. Like, I'm aware that then they might feel like intimidated to train in a public gym. Like, do they have right, can you set them up with, like, a training partner that they go and train with, so that you feel probably far more confident in going into a gym if you're with your friend and doing the same thing, and you can, that kind of thing, you're not solo. So I guess I totally get that concept. What I would say is that, though, like, if you are trying to strength train, like, as long as you're, whatever exercise, for example, you're doing, if you are working hard and then you're working in a rep range from, say, 5 to 15, and at the end of that set, then you probably haven't got too many reps left. Like, that doesn't necessarily matter if that is in a back squat with a bar on your back versus, say, for example, like a machine like leg press, or like a seated leg extension. Like, whilst there are probably a few more benefits, the barbell squat might give you a few more benefits. Like, if it's far less intimidating and more accessible, and you're actually going to go and do it, if it's like machine weights, well, at least you're still going to reduce reductions in muscle mass. You're going to get, like, stronger if you're not super well trained. Like, it's not like you and that stands true for like if it's a single leg squat, like a body weight single leg squat. If you can load that enough that you basically can't do any more reps after 15, like that's still a really good strength training stimulus and going to have very, very similar effect. But you might feel it might be way more accessible than like being like jumping into the squat rack in a really male dominated environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, we'll move on. So just a shameless plug for our next call next month. First, before we move on to the next question. Sorry, Chris. So we do have on the 12th of May the next kind of episode set up with Sport Wales performance nutritionalist Olivia Barnes. So again, a nutrition talk. She's putting together a few slides as well, kind of to present, and then again in a similar way Q&A. We'll send out the link to that meeting in the kind of after notes. I've got a question, Chris. Cross training. So, what cross training activities do you recommend for cyclists to enhance their overall strength and help prevent injury? So, the one thing that comes to mind, which I kind of always was transfixed on, was Richie Port, the Grand Tour rider, and he rode for Ineos. So he I know he used to implement a lot of swimming in his. He's probably used to be a swimmer growing up, based on how good I think he was. I think he swam like 20,000 meters the other day, just for a laugh, like just for a bit of fun in a pool, and at a very quick pace. But like that, I think that is like part of his kind of his weekly routine. Now he would implement a lot of swim training. Is that what kind of cross training would you suggest?
I guess I would suggest like at that particularly really young, really young, but like that sort of youth level, like we've spoken about under 14, under 15, the cross training it's trying to give them an activity that they potentially don't get in cycling. So like in cycling, that is going to be some impact lower limb loading. So like what we mean by that is basically running, jumping, that side of things, to make sure that a particularly female, like 100% particular, it's kind of covers, but particularly female, that they are increasing like bone mineral density to reduce the chance of, like we've spoken about there, like Rhiannon's spoken about, like health into later life, but also in the immediate short term, like you're going to have less chance of when you crash, like potentially bony injury. And then also from a performance perspective, cross-training perspective, you do tend to see now a lot of endurance cyclists using like running as a training tool in particularly around that off season. I know sort of like Visma use it a lot with their development riders, running as a sort of cross training tool. And if you don't, that has to be dripped, like that has to be like dripped in slowly or started early, or ideally, maintained from an early age, because everyone, growing up playing sport, everyone kind of runs, if that makes sense. You'll be running in the playground, playing probably, ideal playing game sports, and like trying to keep that element of cross training up. I'd say that's probably that might be the one thing that's important to do. And then again, that's relevant for cyclocross. It's always going to be easier to be able to maintain that element of lower limb impact, that slight running activity, if you touch on it regularly, rather than like oh, I haven't run in 9 months and now I've got to prepare for a cyclocross race where I've got to do a load of running, and then you go and try and do a run, and the first thing you probably do is going to have some kind of lower limb sort of injury, whether that's like like Achilles tendinopathy or something like that. So I'd say that, like, particularly at that young age, doing some element of impact is quite important.
Yeah, cool.
And then I guess you might flip it around, like your example of Richie Port, like that might be an example, like he can't, like, this is probably where like what is his behaviors as like a real elite athlete might not be madly healthy, like he might not be able to tolerate any lower limb loading because he's so specialist in being a cyclist. So therefore the only cross training he might be able to do is swimming, or he might just really, really enjoy it because it breaks up the monotony of, if he can do an hour in the pool and has to do like an hour less on the bike, then it breaks a bit of monotony up.
Well, following a line on the floor is quite monotonous because I do a lot of swimming, to be fair. So I like going out and riding my bike instead of swimming. But yeah, it's about different people like different things. So that kind of answers it. So yeah, you're talking about that impact, and running is quite important. And certainly a lot of the children, when I've been to some of the events across Wales, a lot of the children I've seen at other sports as well. So it's quite nice to see that, a lot. I don't know whether we've got like Deanne is here and Jonathan and the guys from Mainly Flyers. Definitely, I've seen some good cross country runners who are good cyclists. And so forth, and people who are at the national swim galas, at the, in the national meets in Swansea Pool. I've definitely seen a lot of that. I don't know whether that's something you come across with your athletes. I know maybe Deanne, I'm gonna pick on you if you're still listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got like young children. You're kind of working with the younger athletes. Are they doing lots of different sports there?
Weirdly, is Pembrey Duathlon, junior duathlon on Saturday.
I invented that race, have you know? Did you know that?
Oh, well, no, I didn't like the name drop.
I created that race as it goes, but anyway.
Yeah, so there's quite a few of them having a go at that. We had like a Welsh national triathlete who used to be a Towie rider come back to the club and do some transition training, so a bit of impact, bit of running around.
Yeah, I know that. I know that athlete. Yeah, I know that was
Ivan
Bowen. Yeah, good athlete.
Yeah, and then it's good to mix it up. Probably about 3, maybe 4 of the, say, under 12s to under 14s. They're in the triathlon business, so they do that for a portion of the year. The majority of the kids do a lot of cross country through school mainly, but a few of them run for the local running club as well. And you never discourage that. I don't find that many of the swimmers cross over very well to cycling with us, but they do make excellent runners, and then you can just teach them how to use a bike. So.
Yeah, good. Yeah, excellent. Definitely many rugby players, footballers, again at that younger age in the club.
Yeah, loads. I think Nancarena FC juniors and Towie riders pretty much the same thing.
Okay, they all okay. Yeah, that's good.
It's probably about 9 boys over a span of about 3 years, and they all play the.
And what age group are you talking about then, Deanne? I know I kind of think
8, 9, 10, couple of 12-year-olds.
Yeah, so we'll put that back to what you're saying, what they're doing, which is fantastic to see because it's all about it can get boring riding in a circle on the velodrome, I'd imagine, all the time if you don't mix things up and you learn to play and do other things. What do you think, Chris, for that age group? That the variety and the interest. What do you think that's a good thing, bad thing?
Yeah, 100%. And again, I don't know if this isn't S&C specific guidance, but like at that age group, it's just making sure again that they're not, that multi-sport is fantastic, but just making sure they're not getting stretched too much, that they're compromising on schoolwork and the social side of their, like, I guess, life or development, but 100%. And then if the time comes whereby they are getting maybe a little bit older, so maybe that sort of 13, 14, and they want to do some kind of a little bit more structured physical development, or S&C, or whatever you want to call it, that isn't going to be different really in those initial like 1 to 2 years, if they different for a rugby player versus a cyclist versus a triathlete. Do you know what I mean? Like, it is all the basics of moving well, sort of like moving, then mastering your own body weight, and then slowly moving to some more like external load. Like, it's all the kind of those principles hold true depending whatever sport or pathway you're going down.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to get your opinion on that. Let's go back to the room, so as they say. Any questions? Anyone just want to ask anything? No, we've got Chris here. Or we can finish early. But I'd like some more questions if anyone wants to ask them. Or it's been so comprehensive, Chris, that you've covered everything
I don't know about that.
They could ever want to know.
You can ask away. This guy, you're looking like you might ask something.
Me?
No, Paul.
Paul. Okay, sorry. Paul.
No, I'm pretty happy with it, Chris. I mean, you know my background anyway, Chris. So for me, I'm quite intrigued with it, and I'm very much, one, as a parent, and two, with my background is I'm ex-military and I'm a physical training instructor. So I've got to be really careful not to push my daughter. So it's good that 37 years experience, and I don't know anything when it comes to strength and conditioning. Chris is the god in her eyes. So I'm just very much on that side. It's interesting to listen to what other people are saying. When is the right age to start pushing them? And certainly with her at 14, 15 at the end of the year, she's doing bodyweight exercise now, and she's seen the benefits already. So it's working for her, I think, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Chris. It's the flexibility side where we need to start ramping up with her specifically at the moment. And that's benefiting her. She has stopped doing her netball now because she's so focused on the track side of life. We didn't want her to do, but it was her decision to stop doing that, and so she has gone to a single discipline, and we've got to keep it fun for her, and like you said, keep that social element as well.
And I think that's important that that that's her choice. That's not you. Do you know what I mean? And you'll probably feel without, I feel so subconscious of like, I'm not a parent, so I don't have a clue. But like you probably, hesitant to like push her down that one sports route side of things at this stage, or you're aware of potential pitfalls around that, but it's important that it's her decision,
Yeah, she was lucky because she fell into track cycling purely by doing one of the cycling festives that was on in Newport, and I was there with my triathlon club, and she just fell into it and did the 6-second walk by test, and Rachel grabbed her and says, we need to look at you. So and I think as well, that's something she did herself. So she's more focused on it because she's been picked up. Somebody has said to her, you have got something that we can develop here. So let's try out and let's try it. And, she went and tested out for the talent ID squad and was successful and got onto it. So from my point of view, that's good because it's her doing. She's not being pushed by me. I want to push her down the triathlon route like I did with her sister, but, a 5K run's 450 meters too far for her, or 4.5K too far for her. So she's on that side. But yeah, it's interesting to listen to what people are saying. Certainly with some of the clubs and main flyers, listen to what they're saying about developing their athletes. I see it from a triathlon point of view. And we've got young kids who want to push themselves too much, and from a triathlon point of view, we don't do strength and conditioning with our young athletes at this time. We can do, but we don't. We choose not to because I think some people will push themselves. I've got 2 very good athletes who are on the academy squad that are both injured because they've overtrained, and the parents are letting them overtrain, and they're both 116, 117. So I'm very conscious of that side of me.
And you can I'm not saying but you could probably what. Again, it comes down to what the definition of strength and conditioning is, but you can probably drip a lot of that into their warm-ups.
Yeah.
Like
it's that functional fitness. That's why I asked the question about functional fitness. Functional fitness is something that we should do all the time. Carrying your shopping bags for your parents, that's functional fitness. Call it suitcase carrying strength and conditioning world, but it's functional fitness. Yeah. No, it's good. I'm glad I dialed in, and like I say, we can chat more in depth about it, on Wednesday. Thank you.
Chris is phoning in sick Wednesday, but that's no, sorry, I'm joking. Any other questions from the room? Yeah, anything you guys want to ask, put it in the chat. Please do.
I got another one. How often should we be not asking youth, but how often should youth riders be going through some form of strength and conditioning? Because my son, he's an under 14 second year. He goes to gym once a week and does like a CrossFit, but they're very thing of make sure his form is perfect, then gentle. It's all body weight first, and when the coach says he's ready, he adds the weights, starting with dumbbells, and then when he's ready, then he can add the bars on and add the plates on the bars as and when the coach says so. How often? And it's a 1 hour session, and he comes back and he absolutely loves it, and it's made a big difference on him mentally, physically, and on his cycling. So should he be doing it just a 1 hour a week and then just some gentle stretching and that kind of thing throughout the rest of the week, before and after on the bike?
I'd say that I agree with you completely, that you'll start to see some benefits with one session a week. I guess what I wouldn't say that you need to necessarily do more than that. But I wouldn't then say, if he's really, really enjoying that and loves it, then yeah, by all means, he could do more. But that's kind of got to be his. I would have thought that, him wanting to do that would drive that, and doing 2 a week would be fine. Maybe 3 a week, you might start to say well, even if you go to 2 a week, he's probably got to pull something back. Does that make sense?
If he does 2 a week, he'd have to, his training plan, his cycling would have to change for those 2 sessions, because he can't do a heavy cycling session and a heavy gym session. He would have to.
But if that's, if that's what he would want to do, I don't know. I can't necessarily, but I'd very highly doubt if that would doing 2 a week would really reduce his long-term development along the his cycling journey. If he enjoys doing the gym twice a week, I wouldn't be oh my, you have to do 1 a week because you're going to reduce the cycling side of things. Do you know what I mean? There's not. I'd say at that age, it's going to be probably more dictated by what he enjoys, rather than, this is the optimal amount to do and dose to do in order to be the best possible cyclist. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's back to that, enjoying what they're doing to develop them, rather than following that strict. The strict comes in enough when you're over 18. You don't need to be under. Yeah, because he sees some boys, not necessarily in Wales, but there are rumours of some that are hitting the gym 3-4 times a week and doing big heavy lifts, and they're the same age and completely dominating.
I don't know if it would.
It's that peer pressure thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
they see these ones doing this and go, should I be doing that?
At that age, it's probably going to be more your success in terms of strength and power is probably just going to be more determined by your biological age than your chronological age. There might be people doing a bit, it might be people do more. But if they're sacrificing time on the bike, then it's probably not going to benefit them in the short term. I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna try and so here we are. Thanks. So I was gonna speak to Seth's mum actually, and if you're happy to unmute, I was gonna ask you a question as a parent.
Yeah.
Are you
If
happy
I can help.
Chat?
Yes,
So
I'll try.
yeah, that's okay. So we had a bit of a chat before everything kind of started. I don't know whether so you've got a son, a Welsh son, and you live in the USA. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we do at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a keen cyclist, and
Yeah.
you're hopefully returning back to Wales soon. And as I said, Mainly Flyers and Towie Riders and both on the call. And Vela Merthin, Rhiannon's involved with that club with her son, so they're all on the call. So
Yep.
when he does return, I'm sure they'd welcome him with open arms as introductions. If he's home over the summer, the training
Yeah,
on
that'll
it,
be
isn't that right, Richard? Richard's on. I can see him, Mike and Jonathan.
Yeah.
And yeah, you'd be happy with that. So
more than happy. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
we'll
great.
put you in touch with them. But
Okay,
so
great.
based on what you've heard and things, and maybe you've got different experiences then around strength and conditioning. I think your son's around the age of 16 at the moment. Is that right? Is
Yeah,
that what you
yeah,
said? So
yeah.
what's your experience in America then? Is it a similar approach to what Chris has kind of addressed and the questions people are asking, or does I think he's obviously quite competitive from what you were saying. What do you
Yeah.
think?
So he came, yeah, well, he started with triathlon. So I guess he started about when he was about 10. So he did when he went to high school, they are very kind of pushy here to do the school sports. So he did get to a point where he was nearly burnt out. So we had to really look at him, how much he was doing and balance that and perhaps go back to basics where, yeah, he just cut out the running, stuck to the swimming and the cycling. And now he hasn't hit the weights yet as such. He's endurance rather than sprinting. So he's just now 16 and a half looking at, he's adding like a little bit of weights to sort of his stretching and but that's it. He's literally just doing the work on the bike, stretching and low impact stuff.
Yeah. Is that prescribed kind of work from somebody at the high school then, is it?
Yeah. Well, so his coach at the track now. Yeah.
Okay.
He's basically,
So,
he's coming to his last year of swim and then it'll be probably just the cycling then. And, the odd bit of swimming when he can fit it in, but it wouldn't be a regular thing.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Chris, I don't know. That sound about right? It does. I guess the overloading was
it was
a bit extreme for him, and as parents, sounds 100% like you've made the right decision to kind of withdraw him from some of them activities, because if it was becoming overwhelming and causing injuries.
Yeah, it was the difficulty with balancing like a triathlon out of school, and then the school coaches were not that willing to let him drop the level of sport at school, so it just didn't balance. So he kept back on the school sport.
Okay, and we have had one of the coaches there has put an email in the chat. Mike has. I don't know whether can you see the chat?
Oh, brilliant! Yeah.
Yeah. So similarly, I can send you details of down Carmarthen as well. It depends on where you're going to be coming back and what works best for you. I'm sure they're really welcoming clubs. To be fair, in Wales, and I'm sure they'd happy have him go along to some of the sessions. Chris, does that sound about right? Is that?
Yeah, you might, and I guess where it's slightly older, I guess. Junior, like then you start to put more of a performance lens over it, so depending if that and you don't want to start in my experience, you don't want to start pigeonholing yourself into a certain discipline of cyclists too early, and within, I guess, and I probably mean that in the context of here within road, like you might be, it's hard to know whether you might be a like a road sprinter or like a climber or time trial or like GC, whatever it is. Like it's hard, you don't want to like start to pigeonhole yourself too early, particularly if some, you're still, you don't want to pitch it, that athlete might still be like growing and things like that. If are you a climber just because you've pigeonholed yourself into being a climber at like youth or whatever, and you maybe neglected some sprint skills on the road, and therefore you actually carry on growing until you're 18, 19, and you're actually a lot heavier than everyone else, and you've pigeonholed yourself into a climber, and perhaps that is you've negated other skills too early. So you don't want to like do that. But I would say, like, if you are trying to develop like power on the bike in terms of like, like 6 second, like sprinting, like sprinting for road stage, then there might, there's a decent bit of evidence that that's going to be doing some kind of strength training is going to really benefit that. And so like with a performance lens, then there might be opportunities in the off season to like ramp that up a little bit to a couple of structured sessions a week, and then taper it down in the in season, if that makes sense. If that is something that, viewing it from more of a performance perspective, if that's something that would allow him to be successful in cycling, if he is trying to win sprints or trying to win races via, or is not able to win races if he goes to the finish line with a group, even if that's a group of 5, if he can't sprint, just
that's exactly it.
So obviously, Chris, with regards to road cycling, I'm a big fan of that, and what have you. All the top road cyclists have come from other disciplines. It seems. If you look at Van der Poel, and they all like cyclocross kind of riders. So they've come through the kind of that system and then kind of moved over to the road cycling after. So what's the benefit of, like, I know a lot of children and from the clubs, mainly flyers, and I think is that a good thing, a place to start, is like that kind of different kind of discipline. And then moving over, and like obviously Chris Hoy was a BMX rider. I know everyone probably quite famously was a BMX rider first, racer, and then kind of moved on to track sprinting. So obviously the skill set and the power out of the gate that he kind of built, as a kind of sprint event in itself, isn't it? BMX. What do you think of that, Chris?
I don't know if there's like I wouldn't say there's necessarily like, they've done this sport and therefore that's made them successful. But like, I think it's just a lesson in like, try not to specialize too early. You don't, just because you're good at something when you're 15, 16 doesn't mean that you're going to be really good at it, or that's going to be your specialism when you're 19, 20, or, like 22, 23. So like, it's a good lesson in like making sure that you don't neglect developing other areas. And then also like, there's probably an economical reason as well, to a certain extent. Like, if do all the best riders end up in road because there's a big financial reward, irrespective of where they started off? Do you know what I mean?
Probably, yeah. Money talks, unfortunately, doesn't it?
Do you know what I mean? Like, but that probably then illustrates that you don't have to specialize too early. If you're a really good bike rider, then it doesn't matter if you start off in cyclocross, or other disciplines, or like, you are enjoy riding your bike and you'll carry along the pathway if you're good, talented, and work hard to set. Do you know what I mean? Like, but there's no like, oh my god, you have to be on a road only team at under first year junior and onwards. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and then I think again, going to a number of different races and looking at the results locally in Wales, is some of the same riders are doing really well in cyclocross, track, road, circuit. That them kind of they kind of all encompass, and they're really good at them all, to be fair. Yeah, I just thought I'd ask the question. We'll take one more question then before, and it depends how long it takes. If anyone's got anything else they wanted to add or ask, here's an opportunity.
I was going to say that Harvey's probably a very good example of what you were just saying, because he started off on the endurance squad, Welsh endurance squad, and he's now the Welsh sprinter.
Okay, are we talking about Harvey McNaughton?
Big
Yeah,
Harvey, yeah.
yeah,
He
Big
started
Harvey.
off on the Wales Academy as an endurance rider, and then he developed over into the sprint. So you can do best of both. And he was very, very good on the endurance, but he preferred the sprint, so he changed.
Yeah, is that right, Chris?
Yeah, 100%. Like, there's a lot of examples of. I know Emma. I'm going to pronounce
Finucane.
Yeah.
The Emma Finucane.
She dabbled a little bit. You know, she kept her endurance up for the first few months of being a junior. Like, she did endurance at sprint and endurance at youth level, and then kept it up until sort of Christmas time of being a first year junior, and then before deciding to solely focus on sprint. Like Anna Morris was I'd say failed triathlete, but like a triathlete that realized she was good at cycling at university. Yeah, you
don't pigeonhole yourself, basically.
Yeah, don't. But also it's like a continuum. Like, you know, you do how you would treat a youth is slightly different to a junior, because probably at junior you start to view things a bit more. You know, as a last year youth, you start to probably view things slowly with a bit more of a performance lens, and then that gets ramped up a little bit more as you go into junior. And but ultimately, if we're talking about like, you know, under 14s, under 13, or anything lower than under 14, and that it's not, you know, you don't have to view everything with this big performance lens.
Yeah, cool. Okay. If there's no more questions, I've got one last question. Anyone else want to jump in? One last question, otherwise, which will feed on nicely to the next call. Yeah. So our next call, Chris, is, as you're aware, we're doing a nutrition talk. You know, and we've kind of talked about like training volumes, and we mentioned about zone 2 training and things. Obviously, in your experience, is quite a lot of crossover between all, you know, the cycle training, the strength and conditioning, and then the fuel goes behind it. You know, where do you see the nutrition and stuff on this continuum of training for young athletes has been the focus? And we've had some other questions. How important is that nutrition at an earlier age? Really, I'd imagine quite a lot of food for a lot of training that seems to be happening.
Yeah, I think this is it's the same principles, I guess, apply, like that we've spoken around probably you are viewing this through more of a health and like well-being lens, particularly like lower down the pathway around the nutrition side of things, or literally like making sure you reduce sort of like lower energy availability, reduce the chances of like some of the overtraining side of things, and that's all. I guess it is health and performance, but ultimately it is around like health and making sure that they're like the athletes are as healthy as possible, because they're, if anything, you want them over fueling probably than under fueling. And I guess I'm sure Olivia will talk about this a bit more, but like you have this kind of like public health message that might be is quite well documented around, you know, reducing obesity and like not eating too much, but you almost need to flip that with a developing active child. You know, they need to, you know, particularly doing a reasonable amount of training volume, like that, you know, you need to eat as much carbohydrate as they can and this kind of stuff. So yeah, like it's exactly the same principles as we talked about of like prioritizing sort of like health and development and well-being and that side of things, which then goes hand in hand in performance. But I would say it's really good that it is changing in sort of cycling and endurance sport, and the prevalence of like some of the messaging from an elite level is definitely switched around how important fueling is, how many grams of carbohydrate riders are taking on in racing, in training, and how the sort of like, I don't know, eating's cheating type old dogma is pretty much dying now type thing, you know.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. We're talking about, you know, without going in too much. Is the people's weight, is it powder weight? Yeah, like you said, eat is cheating. That message, you know, it can be really damaging to certainly a young person's mind and influencing them in a very negative way, and then having them worrying about that at such a young age, really, isn't it? Whilst obviously it is important to you know, be a kind of healthy weight if you're racing at that top elite level. It really doesn't matter so much as at the younger age, Chris. Is that fair to say? You know,
yeah, 100%, and probably goes back around to like how do you know what you want to be as well? Like, you know, like they're all young developing athletes that need to be like fueling and eating adequately, you know, as like a growing child in a real basic sense. And you know, if you're starting to specialize and like optimize power to weight and things like that, or climber, that'll come at like 18, 19, 20, 21. You know, they don't need, it's just because someone's a good climber or something at 16 doesn't mean that's what they're going to be when they're older, you know.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, we've got 5 minutes left. I'll stay on until the end if anyone wants to ask me something directly, or Chris will stay on as well.
Yeah.
If you wanted to wait. But
and if we've got stuff to send through as well, like information to send through to signpost. But if anyone has got questions, feel free to email them through to Mark as well.
And I can kind of pass them on to you, Chris. And are you in the office tomorrow?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'll have a chat with you there. For the women's, so yeah, Dr. Stacey Sims has a lot of research. There we go. So for women's kind of strength and conditioning. So yeah, we'll take a look at that. Rhiannon, thank you for that. And if anyone else was interested, just remember her name. Okay. Everyone was free to leave anyway. They voluntarily attended the call. I'm gonna stop the recording now.